All right, well, let's get to some news before we talk about, honestly, a shitload of games that we've all have been playing. I don't think it's worth us going through all the Game Awards nominees, I'm not sure, unless anyone has strong thoughts about those that we need to especially react to. The fact that Claire Obscure is going to win everything this year. Unless, Danika, does something arise to that you wanted to?
I noticed you didn't put it in the news, but the Megabonk
I did.
team. Did you put that in here? Is that in here?
Yes,
you
did.
did.
Megabonk was the one that I thought
okay.
that was the most interesting.
Okay.
So,
okay.
Patrick Bonanza got that goatee nom.
That's fraudulent.
I can't say how I voted, but I think you know that was me.
Don't worry. Like when we do the our holiday podcast and like game, like I'm not mad. I'm just disappointed that I spent 45 hours playing this Donkey Kong. Janet and I are coming for your ass, and there better be a good Mario game next year. Is what I'm saying.
Like records, you know what? Get out of the way.
Us, things for that.
What?
Correct. The codes?
No.
Donkey Kong? What?
No, the ballot.
We don't do that.
Yeah, we used to.
Yeah, when we worked for a giant organization called Vice, and that did not transfer over to the small organization.
We have the same reach.
Known as we talk a lot of shit about Keeley. I'm not sure
we
exactly.
We do. I mean, that's why I'm like.
I mean, everybody
is
critical of Keeley.
But I feel like if Patrick messaged Jeff and was like, "Can I get some invites to the Game Awards?" He'd be like, "Yeah, sure."
Yeah,
He'd be like, "Yeah, sure, man," and he'd do it.
I've literally known Jeff since I was.
Yeah.
He started a website called Game Slice. I think Jeff is maybe a couple years older than me, and he had a website at Game Slice that he started when he was 16. And so I emailed him when I was like a 13-year-old writer, being like, "This is cool. How did you do this?" And so I have known. There's ways I criticize Jeff, like it's all earned. But yes, if I really wanted
together.
to, I could probably. I don't know. Do we really want to vote for the game? Like I just don't care.
It doesn't matter.
But just go. But just go. Going would be so
I
fun.
would to go just so I could drink at a lobby bar with Janet in December. Like
Yeah.
so. Probably too late this year, but maybe next year.
I just picked out my outfit.
I booked a flight home to go see my family. In December, I'm like, I'm gonna a Thursday through a Sunday. These dates look good. I post on my Instagram story. Hey everybody, flying into San Francisco December 11th. If anybody wants to hang out, I got messages from like 3 people being like, "Dude, I'm gonna be in LA at the Game Awards. Like the Game Awards are December 11th. No one's gonna be around. So enjoy, everyone."
Well, one game that will not be at the Game Awards is a game called Megabonk. I'm reading here from PC Gamer. The vampire survivors like Megabonk is one of the big indie hits of the year, selling 1 million copies in just 2 weeks and earning a nomination for Best Debut Indie Game in the Game Awards. This sort of exposure is a big deal, especially for a small indie release, but developer Vedinad said they're withdrawing from the show for one simple and very understandable reason. Megabonk isn't actually their first game. This is from X, where the developer wrote, quote, "It's an honor and a dream for Megabonk to be nominated for the Game Awards, but unfortunately, I don't think it qualifies for the category Debut Indie Game. I've made games in the past under different studio names, so Megabonk is not my debut game. I really appreciate the nomination, support, and votes, but it doesn't feel right in this category. You should vote for another one of these amazing debut titles. They are all amazing games." I thought this was interesting, especially in light of before you got sick, Janet, and we were chatting a little bit while you were in Florida.
Yeah.
You asked me like a version of what is kind of. There's a couple things happening here. Like one is, like what does it mean to be indie, which is a question that has gone back pre-Game Awards, something that Games Press, games players have talked about a lot as game studio size and independent games have become more prominent, and also like. What does it mean for it to be your debut? But Janet, you cover a lot of this stuff, like very specifically. So I'm curious what you made of the developer pulling out, which is unprecedented. As far as I know, nothing like this has happened before. And just sort of what you made of the reasons for it and the surrounding discussion on a quote what it means to be indie, and then also like a quote debut.
Yeah, I mean, I think for the day, I guess starting with the indie question, I think my current definition of indie, which I'm open to changing if
I'm going to look up the one that I
things-
wrote you from my
if
couch.
things occur. I don't know if the industry also kind of changes, because I think some people are thinking of like, you know, studio size for indie and how that might be a differentiation point. But for me, until in an industry where we rarely know like the true size of who's working on something versus who's like full-time employed at a studio, I don't feel like it's worth using that as a metric. I think you want to make it as quantitative as you can. So my current working definition of indie is that you're not owned by anybody and you don't own anybody. That's it. Then you're independent. So that removes the big seemingly independent players like Nintendo, because they own studios. That's why I would say they don't qualify. And it also allows for I think publishing, fair game, money, fair game. I don't think indie needs to mean broke. I think that maybe, yes, there is a conversation to be had around like, is there a point where you have so much money that it changes up, but you're still independent? I feel like you just successfully got funded and published. So I don't think that factors in
the
for me.
curveball on this one has always been, and maybe you should just take it out because it sort of ruins it, is like, what do you do with Valve? Valve like is buying Gabe Newell. I think he owns several yachts at this point.
Yeah.
And so are they independent? Sure, buddy. Like, but I'm not sure that you would necessarily think of Valve as indie under, even if it falls under your technical definition. Which is why, so I looked up, it's like, I don't see it in Discord. I was like, oh, this was a text message. So I wrote to you when you asked about this, in the context of Clair Obscur. As for Clair Obscur, the answer on whether it's indie is probably yes, but it feels indie has shifted into a world where Clair Obscur would obviously be indie 10 to 15 years ago, but feels double A in the absence of those kinds of games anymore. It's just smaller than most big productions. It's hard to look at Clair Obscur as indie if you're also calling Silksong indie, which, you know, is part of the existential discussion of what is indie, separate from you trying to come up with, I think, which is very reasonable, a technical definition so that you just don't have to sweat the existential part.
Yeah, I mean, I do think there could be a space for like either triple I or double A, and have that be like money based, where it's like regardless of independence or not, you fall into like this additional category. But outside of that, I don't think there's much need to pick at it too much. As far as the debut thing, that one's interesting. I think it's fine for them to pull out because that's how they feel about it. And I think that's totally fair. That's how you feel about your work. I can't tell someone how to label their own work. That being said, I would count it as like a debut game because it's the debut under the studio. I think there are many, I think this also goes under the umbrella of there's so many ways to be indie and so many ways that different indies have different advantages. Like, you know, I was talking about this with my colleagues in Florida, like specifically like my colleague Sarah, who works on Fields of Mystria, where it's like some studios will have like that sort of deep resume talent, right? Like if you're working in AAA and you go off and make your own indie studio, you do have like an advantage over if I made a studio with Isaiah and we made a game. And I think some people look at that and they're like, oh, well, the playing field isn't fair, but that's kind of I think the fun and uniqueness of the indie space, where there's so many ways that you can do it. And obviously there's things that help everybody, right? Marketing, money, size, but there's also all these other intangibles of like your background, even just like your like privilege within your own life. Like, are you someone who doesn't need to be the breadwinner in your household and you have that advantage over someone who's working a day job and like coding at night? Like, you know, but then like that can swing the other way with like, maybe you are able to get this grant. And it's like, I think it gets a little dangerous when we try to like hyper nitpick things, especially something like debut game. I think it ends up being almost similar. We do a better job than the Grammys, I think, at this, but it's like debut album. That's never the artist's debut album. But I think when you think in the game space, if you made a student-made game, like that's your debut game maybe. But like, doesn't really count as your debut game. Like I think we all kind of add a little bit. I mean, on a very technical level, I've made a game before because I submitted something for a jam with Isaiah. I would not consider that really my debut game. You know what I mean?
His debut game, right?
Yeah, like I think if you're like, well, technically, it's like I think I think sometimes when it comes to these conversations, we're so caught up on the technicalities and this idea of like wanting to be right that we start to lose meaning. It goes back to like the denotative and connotative meaning of words. Like denotative, like the textbook definition of things matters because like how we conceptualize words and ideas and concepts matters, but it's nothing if we're not bringing in the subjective context to it, which is why I am open to like the idea of, you know, okay, well, what happens with Valve? It's like, I think there will always be some outliers to like pretty much any definition you make. And I think if you have enough outliers, that is when you start to make a new categorization. But I think too often what we do as an industry is we see one thing that feels like it might be an outlier, whether it's Valve or the studio that makes Baldur's Gate, you know, studios like that. And then we say, okay, well, obviously this definition's broken. Let's like rip it apart. But often when people are breaking the definition, they also don't want to come forth with their own definition. They say, well, it just can't be defined anymore. And I find that
if
from
you just
a conversation,
ignore the Epics and the Valve of the world, which are like you can count on one hand, maybe 1.5 hands at best, then the definition still works, which means those are just exceptions to the rule rather than breaking like what you're trying to describe.
And usually people that like, you know, no to no shade, obviously if people have other definitions here, I'd love to hear them because I think they're interesting. But so often when I hear from people that are, you know, oh, this isn't a debut game or this isn't like indie, they don't have a definition of indie that they use. They just say like, I just feel like it's not indie though. And it's like, but why? And I think if we can't have that second part of the conversation, like the conversation then becomes meaningless. Like I don't mind if people have different definitions than me. Some people think you're not indie if you have a publisher. I disagree with that. I think that is a little too extreme. There's so many games that don't have they can't self-publish.
Go look at a lot of the games that come out through Devolver, right? Yes. Like a lot of it's like these are really tiny games that are getting shepherded along where the console ports negotiate, like getting published on different platforms, like a lot of like basic PR and marketing. Like, okay, if that suddenly means that you are not, you know, like,
but if you want to do that, that's fine.
Of course,
like that's your purview. But I think so often people that have these, they get really like fed up at these little like things that feel like they might be outliers, but they don't take it further in the conversation. That's the continuous roadblock that I think is a little frustrating as an industry, where they're like, this isn't indie, and it's like, okay, well then what is, or why not? Because IGN covered it. It's like, that's not enough. I fear that's not enough. Like for me, that's not enough. And if it is enough for you, I think you need to work through like, okay, what is then that working definition, and how might it change over time? Because it probably will change eventually, I think. But as it stands, we're kind of working with the same amorphous thing. And some of us are just a little madder about it than others, it feels like.
I'm curious about Megabonk pulling out, because if you look at the other games in the nominee list for Best Debut Indie, it's Blueprints, Clair Obscur, Despelote, and Dispatch.
Despelote made that list? What the fuck?
Yeah, I'm actually not too familiar with Despelote.
Well, Keeley said if you finish the game, then he'll put it on Best Debut Indie Game, and so you made the cut. So that's like, you know.
But like, haven't I'm sure most of these games people have worked on games before, released games before. I don't know about Blueprints and Despelote, but Dispatch and Clair Obscur.
Clair Obscur is ex Ubisoft, Dispatch is ex Telltale, broadly
so
speaking.
It's all people who worked on. By the way, Dispatch, a lot of the leads on that game are from Petaluma, my hometown, baby.
Hell yeah!
Just gotta say.
Let's go.
But by Megabonk's definition, some of these other games would also not be debut indie games. So I guess it's just, I'm curious about you know.
Well, I think some of this, the issue here is, and I think why getting hung up on the technical definition is not worth it, is there are so many games. And so, like, what you really want are, like, more awards that can find ways to recognize, like, how amazing, like, as we can hold in two things in our heads. We're like, the industry simultaneously feels like it's falling apart in many different levels, and there's a lot of structural economic, socioeconomic changes that are making it a really brutal place to be. It is hard to find a job. It is stressful to maintain a job, and a lot of it feels broken. And yet at the same time, like, if you go on to something like Steam or the eShop, like, you are just overloaded with, like, games, like, an amount of games that are so good that when we used to think of, like, what was the best year in games? Was it 1998 or 1996? That stuff gets so blurry because there's just so much good, interesting stuff that's coming out these days. And so part of the awards process is just finding ways to just come up with essentially gimmicky ways to recognize, like, we understand as a culture, as a medium, like, we should find ways to recognize and hold up the things that made an impact and that we loved that year. And so calling it Best Debut Indie Game is just a trick to find a way to recognize a series of games. And so it's why, like, even as we move to like more like gender neutral ways of describing like Best Actor, Best Actress, and maybe using the term Best Actor more, it's like, well, if we eliminate the Best Actress category, suddenly like a bunch of really great like performances aren't recognized. So there's got to be a way to square, you know, to make that work and not lose recognizing great works that happen in the year in the process, which is a little bit what happens here. I respect the developer's choice to pull out and like, hey, you know, I'd rather have these games recognized. I don't feel this fits my self-identifying definition in the category. At the same time, I think it's also a recognition that there's so much out there, and part of the Game Awards process is to come up with categories that I think best represent and find ways to represent like how many good games are out there and the difficulty in getting them nominated and held up at the end of the year.
I will say I worry about the toxic positivity effect this will have on the industry, which is to say that like I think there are a lot of people in the industry who feel like it's bad if a game sweeps awards. But if the categories are like designed such that it can't, like, I think it's kind of one of the problems or struggles with the Game Awards. Like if it is, which, you know, we can obviously argue or psychoanalyze like what is the purpose of the Game Awards in like different ways, and like, you know, kind of putting that aside. With the structure of the awards, I think specifically because it's video games, they are made such that if you're nominated for Game of the Year, you're probably going to get nominated for a lot of the other categories. Because if you're like Claire Obscure, for instance, if you're one of the games of the year, you're probably like Best RPG. You're probably, turns out Silksong probably has good music and good action and good whatever. So it does end up being, so many of the categories are about the parts that the sum of the GOTY nom ends up like weighing really heavily. I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with that ending up being the case. I do think that, you know, if there was a way to voice, I think limiting how many things something could be nominated for, I'd be down for that. Like I know my friend Mike runs the is like part of running the Indie Game Awards, and like that's a kind of limiter that they have on their award show of like how many categories you can be nominated for that same reason. But I
look
also
at best
think
performance in the Game Awards, right?
Yeah.
Like where this has been one point of contention in which there are 6 people nominated, and 3 of them are from Claire Obscure Expedition 33.
Yeah.
So one soft way you could, even if you didn't limit across holistically the Game Awards, it does seem like, hey, there should be a limiting process on like how many folks are represented in a specific category, because all the performances here that are nominated from that game are tremendous. There's something very funny about the Charlie Cox one that I'm not going to get into. If you played the game, you understand. But that is excluding other great performances because of a rule that should probably exist that limits it to probably 2, right? Like there's someone that's not here nominated because 3 seems over. It's half the category. Like it's half the nominees, which feels excessive.
Who is nominating? How do nominations work? Because I also like I go through this list and I'm like, is this just like the Jeff Awards? Because most anticipated game, great example, 007 First Light, Grand Theft Auto 6, Marvel's Wolverine, Resident Evil Requiem, and The Witcher 4. Where, like, who is being polled?
Hundreds of media organizations, like
across the world.
The issue.
Not like there are 2, like that is, there are 2 steps to the process. Like at least is how it was when we were submitting at Waypoint. Janet, I think you're still involved with that to some degree with MinMax, in which there is a, and again, this is like a worldwide thing. This is like, it was interesting seeing some people try and parse out why did Blueprints not get nominated for a Game of the Year. It's probably because that game is just not localized into many different languages, and the Game Awards, although it feels very like English centric, actually one of the things that Keighley does a pretty good job of is getting lots and lots of different outlets involved worldwide, which I think would then help explain something like Blueprints not necessarily making it to the finish line there on Game of the Year. But yes, the media outlets submit their nominations, and then those are tallied up and become part of what you see here. So that is happening as a culmination of media outlets submitting nominees, and then the actual voting is a combination, right, of outlets voting and audience choice.
Because there is notably, and this has been a thing with the Game Awards forever, a lack of indie games, like in these categories. Like most anticipated game, there's not a single indie game. So I guess I just get curious, like, why is that happening?
I think because the odds of, like, us, just as a fake example, like us both writing down, mixtape. It's like maybe if me and Patrick were voting on different, like, outlets, we could both write down mixtape. But the odds of everyone else also writing down mixtape are much lower than the odds of a lot of people just writing down GTA. And I think also, I'm not sure to what degree there's weight in like lists, because people submit kind of, a list top down of like most to least. So it's like maybe GTA wasn't everyone's number one most anticipated, but it appeared frequently enough that like it tallies up. But I'm not sure that is like totally speculative, because I don't know how they like tally the votes and how that might factor in. But I think that's why, and I think that's why indies generally don't appear as often, because everyone has to both play them and then also agree that it's worthy of whatever category. While it's a lot more likely, I think, just industry-wide, that everyone played, a few hours of Ghost of Yotai and thought of something of it, like whether it's good or bad or whatever. It's like just the big hits are going to be the ones that people have, I think, more data on.
Which is why it's good that they have versus like specific appeal, right? Like
exactly.
A lot of indie games would be like hyper-targeted. That's why I think that explains Chia looking at Despelote and going, "The fuck?" Because that's the kind of game that you would actually think wouldn't.
That's the kind of game I would put on the list. Right,
and
nobody else would.
It's in there twice. It's in there twice too.
It helps explain a little bit what you're talking about, Danika. Is like,
you don't think we know ball, Chia? I mean, I'm just saying all the jurors aren't that bad.
I was thinking back to when we actually would fill these out, and
I'm just saying that
every once in a
anything
while,
you
I would
agree
have a
with,
game.
That was me, and anything you don't fuck with, that wasn't me. That I ain't got nothing to do with that. I ain't got nothing to do with the stuff you don't fuck with. The stuff you fuck with?
Marvel Wolverine? You did. That's not you.
No.
What game I'm excited for, you'll never know. Also, I think with like the indie thing, like for anticipated real quick, it's like I love indie games. I am also excited for GTA 6. I don't even actually remember what I put down for that at this point. But it's like, I think that's the other thing too. You need someone to be like, I'm just going to have this. So I don't know. I also think most anticipated is kind of not that I don't care at all, but it's like, it's really just what I'm looking forward to from a trailer I saw one time. It's like such a
it's best
nothing kind of category.
Best marketing.
Yes.
Best marketing so
the
far.
The asses and seats award.
Right? Like, I mean, I would just be putting Radio the Universe on it every year for the last
part of it is like
10 years.
Some of these games that are on here, like games will come out. Like most anticipated indie. Will that come out? Will it come out in the next 4 years?
I do think most anticipated indie would be a nice category, kind of like offset that element. That would be really fun and good to do.
That would be. I think that would be a good splitting.
But then again, it is ultimately just like what could get the word out, because otherwise you wouldn't hear it unless like you're just like hyper localized on like a developer that you're following, right?
And I think that would be like hyper beneficial for like indies,
Because of the numbers, it's just like it'll probably work out. That's like whatever got the widest reach, right? It's just whoever got the word out furthest. Because it's just too many. There's too many variables for it to ever not be like a mean, right? It's the problem with all of these types of shows, right? Like you're not getting like the local punk band on the Grammys, right?
Yeah.
We're almost all, because I do think I believe at least some form of the BAFTAs does a more like you have a collection of people and they sort of argue, which I do think can sometimes yield more interesting results than if we all just write down like what's a game we liked, and it's like you know what, I did like Spider-Man that year. It's like I know it makes me a basic bitch, but it was fun. You flew with the birds. The homeless guy died. Like it's like I meant something to me. It meant something to me.
It is also indicative of the way that the industry functions, right? Like, for most outlets, you end up having to chase the bigger games based on like views and like just like the content strategy has to be around the biggest things when you're not specifically like a personality run site where like you can kind of do whatever you're interested in regardless, right? Like, which means there's just going to be that sort of consolidation of like what's the biggest thing. Everyone has to have a thought about that thing, so they've played it, so they're more likely to write it down than like, again, I randomly picked out this one tiny game that I love, but like nobody else played it that year because it didn't happen to be one of those tentpole releases that everyone has to talk about because it's part of the culture ultimately, right? Like, it's like you get those like breakthrough indies like Blueprints, Balatro, things like that catch on, that then can be talked about because they're so big.
Ball Pit, like is one of those.
And even those for like the larger audience, which is not to say that like, oh, we're actually secretly doing a good job because like a normie thinks so. No offense to the normies out there that are like probably not listening because they don't consume content like that.
Right.
Like I remember a conversation online with because last year was Balatro, right? Or was that 2 years ago? Oh my God, time's crazy. People being like,
that was last year.
What? Like people online were like, what the fuck is Balatro? Even though it was like one of the biggest games of the year and on top of its critical acclaim, but like for a lot of people, they're like, I don't know what this game is. Yeah, they like had no idea, and they're like, why would this be nominated? And then it's funny because then they'd play it and then be like, wow, it's really good. So it's like,
actually, it turns out.
I just got a calendar filled with from Fangamer filled with photos of Ben Starr dressed as the Joker.
Oh yeah, I remember that. He really went for it with that role.
That's my calendar.
I think to like briefly bring back to the Megabonk thing, that what I worry about when I mention like toxic positivity is I do think there's an unnecessary and like, I don't know, kind of messed up like higher moral ground that's like imposed on indies where it's like, oh, like Silksong should have like given way more of a heads up because like they know they're like ruining it for like these other games, or like this studio should like step down because they're too big, or see, it's not his debut game. Like, they're honest. They keep it real. They're not like these other... It's like... and I don't know. I think that is... If we know, like, the power of, like, awards in terms of, like, funding, getting other things... It's a little weird to be like, well, they're winning too much. They should step back and let, like, the real indie shine. And it's a level of morality that we don't impose on other elements of the game industry that I think is, like, kind of messed up. Where, like... It's like indie, you have to be so many things. You have to be small, but big enough that I know you, but scrappy enough that I don't think you bought your way in, but also humble enough that you step to the side for your fellow indies who aren't doing as well as you. Like, you can keep the lights on, so you should take your foot off the gas, which is quite literally like an insane proposition to me. But I do worry about that with like, even though I respect if the people that made Megabonk, the team that made Megabonk wants to say, hey, this isn't how I see my game. Totally fair. That makes sense. They want to pull out of this thing. Cool. But I think looking at that and attributing, like, they're doing it the right way is what I fear will be part of the conversation in ongoing years.
Yeah.